In the midst of routine airport chaos, an abandoned bag becomes the spark that could change everything. What starts as an ordinary day for Officer Jake and his canine partner Rex takes a dangerous turn. A police dog's nose never lies. The truth behind an abandoned bag. The bustling airport was alive with energy. Travelers hurrying to their gates, families saying tearful goodbyes, and announcements echoing over the loudspeakers. The bright fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, creating a sense of normalcy in the vast open space. But something was different today. It was as if the calm before a storm was in the air. The clock ticked relentlessly, and for every second life continued as usual until it didn't. In the midst of it all, two figures stood out: Officer Jake and his loyal K9 partner, Rex. As always, they were just another team of working dogs and handlers patrolling the terminal, watching over the crowds, their bond unshakable. But little did they know this routine day would soon spiral into something much darker. Jake had been with the Australian Federal Police for over 8 years, and in that time, his relationship with Rex, his German shepherd, had deepened in ways words couldn't explain. Rex was more than just a dog. He was family. They had faced countless challenges together, from chasing down criminals to protecting innocent lives. Jake trusted Rex with his life, and Rex, with his keen senses, trusted Jake to always lead them with courage and integrity. They moved through the airport as a seamless team, Jake observing the crowd, while Rex's sharp nose sniffed the air for any trace of trouble. Their unspoken understanding was what made them such an effective unit. As they neared the baggage claim area, something unusual caught Rex's attention. His ears perked up and his nose twitched. A low growl rumbled from deep within his chest as he started pulling at his leash. Jake could feel the tension in the air, his partner's instincts never lying. Rex had been trained to detect everything from explosives to drugs, and his body language spoke volumes. This was no ordinary scent. Jake paused for a moment, scanning the area. It was busy, people walking by, oblivious to what was unfolding. Just a few feet away, yet there it was, a black suitcase abandoned and out of place. In a high-security area like this, bags rarely went unnoticed, let alone left unattended. Jake approached the bag cautiously, his hand resting on Rex's harness. The crowd bustled around them, but in that moment, it felt as if time slowed. Rex was focused, his eyes locked on the suitcase, his tail stiff with alertness. Jake bent down, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the bag's owner. No one seemed to be looking for it. The terminal was still packed with people, but the bag was abandoned as if it were forgotten, left there for a reason. Why would someone leave something like this in such a busy and secure area? It didn't sit right with Jake. His instincts were telling him that this wasn't just an accidental loss. Something far more dangerous was at play. Rex began to circle, the bag sniffing it thoroughly. His reaction was unmistakable, a growl that grew louder, his body tense with anticipation. He was certain there was something dangerous inside. Jake's heart raced, but he kept his cool. He quickly alerted his fellow officers, and the security team began to move into position. A suspicious package in an airport, especially one that set off Rex's alert, was never a good sign. Jake signaled for the bomb squad, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't an explosive threat. The tension in the air thickened as the officers gathered around, all eyes on Rex as he continued to circle the bag, his instincts never lying. Jake trusted Rex completely, but even he couldn't deny the cold weight in his stomach as he watched Rex's every move. The dog's instincts had saved countless lives before, but now the weight of their responsibility felt heavier than ever. He knew Rex wasn't just a tool, he was his partner, his friend, and whatever was hidden inside that bag could jeopardize everything they had worked so hard to protect. The team continued their work, carefully scanning the bag for anything unusual. But Jake's mind was elsewhere. Rex had been his partner for so long, they were two halves of the same whole. In that moment, he realized just how much he had come to depend on Rex, not just as a dog, but as a true friend. As the security officers carefully opened the bag, the contents were slowly revealed. It wasn't a bomb. Instead, it was worse. Illegal. Drugs, cleverly hidden within layers of cloth. Jake's heart sank. The discovery confirmed what they feared. The criminals had been using the airport to smuggle in drugs, hidden in plain sight. But who were they? Where had they gone? The clock was ticking now. The airport was on high alert, but the criminals had already left. Jake's mind raced, trying to piece everything together. If they didn't act fast, the evidence could vanish, and the criminals would escape. Rex, now focused on his task, sniffed around the area for any other traces of contraband, his nose sharp as ever. But time was running out. Just as Jake was about to call for reinforcements, a sudden realization struck him. This wasn't just a routine drug bust. It was something far more dangerous, far more personal. The criminals knew the airport, knew how to avoid detection. They were still here, and they were desperate to retrieve their stash before it was too late. The chase was on, and Jake and Rex had no choice but to follow it, trusting their instincts each other, and the unspoken bond that had been forged over years of working side by side. This moment would define them, testing not just their skills, but the strength of their partnership. The stakes had never been higher, and the road ahead would change everything. The tension in the airport was palpable now. The calm that had once pervaded the terminal had been replaced by an electric undercurrent of unease. As soon as the security team was informed of the abandoned bag, the entire atmosphere shifted. Officers moved in with precise coordination, their faces hard with focus. Jake and Rex were no longer just patrolling, they were on high alert. Rex's keen eyes scanned the surroundings, while Jake stood close by, silently gauging the room for any sign of trouble. The threat felt real now. Every second was precious as more officers moved in to establish a perimeter. The weight of what they might be facing hung heavily in the air. People were still milling about, but now there was a sharp edge to their movements. Every stranger seemed like a potential suspect. The clock ticked away, and the feeling of dread grew. Rex, though focused on the bag, had already begun to pull in other directions, sniffing the air, picking up subtle signs of something deeper. The nervousness that had crept into Jake's chest only deepened as Rex's reactions grew more intense. The dog wasn't barking, he was calm, but his nose was working overtime, and his posture was alert. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, his voice tight with concern. Rex turned his head slightly, his ears back, signaling something critical. The drug-sniffing dog's instincts were unmistakable. It wasn't a bomb. It was drugs, something Jake realized the moment he saw Rex's reaction. The dog was trained. To differentiate between sense and the depth of Rex's attention to detail meant only one thing. Jake had no time to hesitate. The danger had changed. It wasn't just about neutralizing an explosive threat. It was about stopping a criminal operation. The officers carefully opened the bag, their movements calculated, their breaths shallow. What lay inside wasn't a bomb, but something far worse. Large packages wrapped in plastic, tightly secured with tape. Jake's heart sank as the team began to pull out the contents. Drugs. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't a simple mistake. The smugglers had found a way to bring illicit substances through one of the most secure places in the country. The sheer audacity of the criminals left Jake cold with anger. They had exploited the very system that was meant to protect the people. Rex stood still, his body tense but steady. Jake's eyes met his partner's, and in that brief moment, there was no need for words. They both knew the stakes now. They were in deeper than they had anticipated. The next step was to figure out who had left the bag. But when the security team checked the CCTV footage, the situation grew even more complicated. The cameras near the baggage claim area had mysteriously malfunctioned during the time frame the bag had been abandoned. Jake cursed under his breath. There was no way to know who had dropped the bag. They were flying blind. Rex, ever the expert, sniffed around again, his nose sharp and methodical. He wasn't about to give up. Jake knelt beside his partner, rubbing his ears gently. "It's okay, boy, we'll figure this out." Rex's tail wagged slightly, reassuring Jake, though there was no stopping the sense of urgency building between them. With no footage to rely on, they were left with only their instincts and their training. They couldn't afford to let the criminals slip through their fingers. Meanwhile, outside the airport, the smugglers were already on edge. They had noticed the increased security, and their worst fear was becoming a reality. Their stash had been discovered. The air was thick with tension as they scrambled to come up with a plan. They couldn't let the bag fall into the wrong hands, especially not now. The risk was too high. They knew they had to act fast. As the minutes ticked by, the smugglers realized the only way out was to take extreme measures. They had no choice but to retrieve their stash and eliminate any threats in their way. The plan they formed was as risky as it was reckless, but they were running out of time. What Jake and Rex didn't realize was that they had unknowingly walked straight into the heart of the smugglers' desperate scheme. As the officers continued their search, Jake's focus remained on Rex, who was still intensely sniffing the air. The dog's instincts were driving him forward, his nose pulling him toward the terminal's east wing. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, his hand tightening around Rex's leash. But just as they rounded the corner, the sound of footsteps in the distance sent a chill down Jake's spine. They weren't alone. Rex stopped dead in his tracks, his body stiff with alertness. Jake instinctively pulled him back, his heart pounding. The smugglers were closer than they thought. They had set a trap, one that would require both Jake and Rex to fight for their survival. Suddenly the fire alarm blared across the terminal, sending people into a frenzy. Was it a coincidence, or had the smugglers triggered it as part of their distraction plan? The chaos in the airport escalated as the flashing lights and loud sirens threw everyone into a state of panic. Jake's first instinct was to secure Rex and make sure the crowd remained calm, but the situation was slipping out of control. Rex, however, wasn't panicking. His instincts were laser-focused, his eyes scanning the terminal, looking for the next sign. Amidst the confusion, the smugglers moved quickly, their plan in motion. The distraction had worked, but Jake and Rex weren't about to let it deter them. They had a job to do, and they weren't backing down. Amidst the chaos, panic set in. People ran in all directions, tripping over one another as the sound of the fire alarm rang in their ears. Officers were trying to control the crowd, but the smugglers had made their move. As Jake and Rex navigated through the confusion, they spotted one of the criminals making a beeline for the abandoned bag. In a moment of instinct, Rex bolted forward, Jake right behind him. "No!" Jake shouted, his voice drowned out by the noise. The criminal had one goal, to retrieve the bag at any cost. But Rex was faster. The dog lunged, knocking the criminal off balance. The bag was out of his reach, but the struggle was far from over. A fight ensued, the criminal struggling to regain control of the bag, but Rex's grip was unyielding. Jake was there in an instant, pulling the criminal to the ground. In the heat of the moment, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and desperation. It was a battle they couldn't afford to lose. Rex's body was tense, every muscle coiled, as if anticipating something he couldn't yet see. His nose twitched with heightened awareness, and his ears flicked back in the direction of a faint sound. It was the subtle click of boots against the floor, the quick shuffle of desperate feet, trying to remain unnoticed. The criminals were still here, and they were closing in fast. Jake felt the shift in the air before he saw it. Rex's instincts had always been spot on, and now they were sharper than ever. "Stay with me, Rex," Jake muttered under his breath, his voice tight with urgency. The dog's head turned towards him briefly, and in that split second there was a silent understanding between them. They were in the middle of a high-stakes game, and Rex was ready for it. Suddenly the chaos exploded. People were still scrambling to get out of the way, but now it wasn't just the fire alarm causing havoc. The criminals, realizing their time was running out, made a break for it. In a flash, they darted through the terminal, pushing past startled travelers. Jake's heart raced, and he could feel the rush of adrenaline. But Rex was already on their tail, his powerful legs propelling him forward with unwavering determination. The space around them seemed to warp, distorted by the panic of the crowd, the noise and the fast-approaching danger. The criminals were fast, but Rex was faster. "Go, boy, go!" Jake shouted, and they were off. The dog weaved through the crowd like a shadow, dodging obstacles, never once losing sight of the criminals ahead. The terminal had become a battleground, with Jake and Rex moving as one, a team born from years of trust and training. Jake's breath came in short bursts as he struggled to keep up, but he knew Rex wouldn't stop. They were close now, so close they could almost reach out and grab the criminals. The tension was suffocating, each moment feeling like a lifetime. The criminals, realizing they were being pursued, tried to break through the crowd and lose themselves in the maze of hallways, but Rex had their scent, and no amount of running would shake him off. His nose was locked in, his determination unwavering. The dog's speed was breathtaking as he closed the distance between himself and the criminals. They were cornered now. There was nowhere left to run. Rex's muscles rippled as he surged forward, Jake right behind him. The criminals tried to split up, hoping to confuse the pursuit, but Rex was a single-minded force. One of them was fast, but not fast enough. With a snarl of triumph, Rex lunged, his body slamming into the criminal's legs, sending him sprawling to the ground. The bag containing the drugs spilled out, but Rex didn't let go. His teeth were firm, his body unyielding. The criminal struggled, but Rex held him in place, pinning him to the floor. For a moment, everything seemed still. The airport was silent, except for the sound of Rex's panting and the criminal's muffled curses. But then, the man reached for his waistband, his fingers sliding around a cold metallic object. Jake's heart skipped a beat as the criminal pulled out a gun, aiming it shakily toward them. The air crackled with danger. Time seemed to freeze. Rex, sensing the new threat, let out a low growl, his body poised and ready to react. Jake's hand was on his own weapon, but he knew better than to draw too quickly. Rex had the advantage, and Jake trusted him with his life. "Rex, stay!" Jake's voice was firm but laced with fear, knowing the slightest movement could set off a tragedy. The gunman's hand shook, his finger twitching on the trigger. The situation had reached a boiling point. One wrong move, and it could be over, for them all. Jake's voice broke through the tense silence. "Rex, down!" he commanded, his tone sharp and authoritative. Rex didn't hesitate. The moment Jake spoke, Rex darted forward, using his powerful frame to shield Jake from the criminal's aim. The gunman's aim faltered for a split second, but that was enough. Rex's powerful jaws closed around the man's wrist, knocking the gun free, and with a sharp, aggressive pull, the criminal was disarmed. But the moment wasn't over. Rex immediately shifted his weight, pushing the criminal to the ground with a force that left the man gasping for breath. The dog's teeth were bared, his eyes locked onto his opponent's with an unspoken promise of unwavering loyalty and protection. Jake rushed forward, his hand firmly on his gun, but he knew that Rex had already neutralized the immediate threat. As the criminal struggled, Rex remained steadfast, refusing to let go. But in the scuffle, the man fought back with desperation. With one violent motion, he kicked Rex in the side, sending the dog sprawling to the floor. The blow landed hard, but Rex didn't flinch. He growled, refusing to let up. But then something changed. Rex let out a sharp whimper, his body faltering for just a moment. Blood began to trickle from a wound on his side, and Jake's heart stopped. "No, Rex, stay with me, boy." Jake's voice was panicked now, his eyes wide with fear. Rex's breathing was shallow, but he still managed to keep the criminal pinned. His sacrifice had saved them both, but the cost was clear. The dog had been hurt, and Jake's heart ached as he realized the gravity of what had just happened. Within moments, backup arrived. The sound of sirens and footsteps filled the terminal, and several officers rushed to secure the scene. The criminal was quickly cuffed and pulled to his feet, but Jake barely noticed. His focus was entirely on Rex. His partner, his best friend, was lying on the floor, bloodied but still breathing. Officers began to secure the area, but Jake could only kneel beside Rex, his hand gently running over the dog's fur. "You did it, boy," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "You saved us." But despite the victory, the cost was clear. Rex had risked everything, and now he was paying the price. With shaking hands, Jake scooped Rex into his arms, his heart pounding with fear. "It's okay, boy. You're going to be okay," he murmured, but his voice cracked with emotion. Rex's head rested against Jake's chest, his eyes dim but still filled with loyalty and love. The world around them seemed to blur. All that mattered was Rex. The dog's breathing was slow and labored, but he was still alive. That was all Jake needed to know. He could feel the warmth of Rex's body against him, the steadiness of his heartbeat, and it gave him a flicker of hope. They had survived this together. No matter what came next, they would face it as they always had, side by side. The criminals were finally under control. The police officers swarmed in, securing the area, arresting the men who had caused so much chaos. But as Jake stood there watching the scene unfold, he couldn't shake the hollow feeling in his chest. The victory felt tainted. Rex was lying motionless, his breathing shallow, in the back of the ambulance. The bag of drugs had been recovered, the criminals captured, and the airport was slowly returning to normal, but none of that seemed important. Now, all Jake could think about was the dog who had risked everything for him. The victory was overshadowed by fear, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. He had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. Not until Rex was okay. The sirens wailed as the ambulance sped through the streets, but Jake hardly noticed. His hands were on Rex, his partner, who had curled into a protective ball despite the pain. The bleeding had slowed, but the fear never did. Jake's eyes never left the dog's face as the world around them seemed to blur. He whispered softly, his voice shaking with emotion. "You're going to be okay, Rex. We're almost there, buddy. Just hang on." He could feel the weight of the hours they had spent together, the bond between them stronger than any words could describe. The fear that gnawed at him, would they make it in time, was unbearable. The life of his best friend hung in the balance. With every second that ticked by, the reality of the situation hit harder. But there was no way Jake would let go, no way he would lose Rex now. As the ambulance rushed forward, Jake's mind wandered back to the beginning. The first time he and Rex had met was nothing short of a miracle. Jake had been skeptical, unsure, of how a canine partner could possibly be as reliable as a human. But Rex had proven him wrong from the start. With every case, every mission, their bond had deepened. It was more than just trust. It was a friendship forged in the heat of danger. Rex had always been there, ready to protect him no matter what. Even when things seemed impossible, when the weight of the world pressed down on them both, Rex had stood by him unwavering. It was that bond that kept Jake going now, even when he felt like his world was falling apart. "Stay with me, buddy," Jake whispered, as if the dog could hear his thoughts. It wasn't just loyalty they shared. It was a friendship that had been tested and solidified over years of service. The moment the ambulance pulled into the emergency clinic, Jake's heart skipped a beat. He watched as Rex was quickly wheeled into the treatment area, the sound of urgent voices and rushing feet filling the air. The doctors worked quickly, their hands moving with practiced precision. But despite all their skill, the outcome was still uncertain. Jake stood outside the door, his hands gripping the cold metal railing, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him to rush in, to be with Rex, but he knew it was out of his hands now. He had to trust the doctors, but the waiting was agony. Through the thick glass, Jake saw the steady rise and fall of Rex's chest. Each breath a small victory, a silent reminder that his partner was still fighting. Was it enough? Would Rex pull through? Every part of Jake wanted to believe he would, but the fear was hard to silence. Hours passed, but the uncertainty never eased. When the doctor finally emerged, Jake's heart dropped. The look in the vet's eyes was kind but heavy with the weight of the news he was about to deliver. "He's stable," the doctor said. "But—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Rex has suffered some severe internal injuries. He's a fighter, but I'm afraid his days as a working dog are over." The words felt like a punch to Jake's gut. He had known the risks, but hearing it out loud made it real. Rex had been his partner, his teammate, through everything. The thought of not having him by his side anymore was unbearable. "Is there no way—" Jake's voice trailed off, his hope flickering. The doctor shook his head gently. "It's not safe for him anymore. His body just can't take the stress of active duty." Jake nodded, his throat tight with unshed tears. It was a decision that had to be made for Rex's well-being, but that didn't make it any easier. He had always believed Rex was indestructible, but now he had to accept the truth. The days that followed were some of the hardest Jake had ever faced. As Rex healed, he became weaker. He could no longer run the way he once did, nor was he able to carry out the complex tasks that had once been second nature. Watching his best friend struggle broke Jake's heart more than any criminal he had ever faced. The hardest moment came when he had to tell Rex goodbye, not forever but as a partner in the field. "I'll always need you, Rex," Jake whispered one last time as the dog lay beside him. "But it's time to rest now, buddy. You've earned it." The tears came without warning. Jake didn't try to hold them back. The bond they shared wasn't just about working together, it was about something deeper, something unspoken. Rex had given everything for him, and now it was Jake's turn to give everything back. Rex's official retirement ceremony was bittersweet. There were no more missions, no more rushing into danger. But there was peace. Rex was surrounded by the officers who had watched him, worked tirelessly, and they all gave him the respect he deserved. As Jake stood there watching the dog receive his retirement badge, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. "You've done more than enough," Jake said, a smile on his face through the tears. "Now it's time for you to rest." Rex looked up at him, his eyes still full of trust and devotion. He wasn't leaving Jake. He was simply beginning a new chapter, one where he could still be Jake's companion, but in a different way. Together, they would find a new rhythm. The future might not look like the past, but it didn't matter. They were still a team. A few months later, Jake took Rex on their first walk after his retirement. It was a quiet walk, with no sirens blaring, no criminals to catch, just the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the steady rhythm of Rex's steps beside him. They didn't need words anymore. Their bond spoke louder than anything. As they walked, side by side, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. Rex may have retired from active duty, but their partnership was far from over. The dog had saved his life, and now Jake was there for him in return. Their story would never end. It was a story of trust, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. And as they continued down the path together, one thing was clear. No matter where life took them, they would always be together.